You're watching Twin Tiers Sunday with Jennifer Sheehan and special guest Tom Seen.
America's railroads have been our nation's transportation arteries for nearly 200 years. Carrying freight and transporting passengers, the railroad system has faced many challenges over the years, but has remained a vitally important part of America's transportation scene.
The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10, 1869 opened the door to the development of the United States like it never had before and hasn't since. Once the railroad line was completed, communities sprung up along the tracks and undiscovered country became towns and villages. Americans could now travel across country in just a matter of days, as opposed to the approximately 3 months it took before. And for the first time, the two coasts were united.
On a sunny weekend in August, hundreds of rail fans boarded an excursion operated by the Fort Wayne, Indiana Railroad Historical Society. Former Nickel Plate Road steam engine number 765 took them from Buffalo through many miles of rural areas which haven't seen passenger trains in decades, bringing them to Corning for a layover before the return to Buffalo.
This locomotive was built in 1944, and it operated on the Nickel Plate Road from Buffalo west to Cleveland, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Chicago. The locomotive ran until 1958 on the railroad. Was retired with the arrival of new diesel locomotives, which weren't any faster or any more powerful, but they were much more economical to operate and a lot less manpower. So the engine wound up stored for a couple years. Finally, the railroad decided that they weren't going to use the old steam engines anymore, and this engine was given to the city of Fort Wayne, and it wound up in a city park. Some of our members approached the city about they should do something about this locomotive and give it a paint job. Well, the city turned it around and said, you guys need to do something about it. We'll lease it to you for 25 years for $1 a year, and you set up an organization and do that. And so they kind of really gave us the idea, and we ran with it.
After several overhauls and restorations, the majestic engine hauled dozens of vintage passenger cars past waving fans at intersections and hillsides all along the route. The excursions traveled over Norfolk's southern tracks, originally built by the long-gone Erie Railroad, one of the earliest railroads to bring service to the southern tier.
Well, what we've seen today coming from Buffalo to Corning is every grade crossing. We've seen dozens of folks to hundreds of folks at many locations. Letchworth State Park, both sides of the train, within sight, there had to have been hundreds and hundreds of automobiles and people. So yeah, there's a lot of folks out to see it. It's a rare event.
Many of the spectators waved at the train from Letchworth State Park, the highlight of the trip, which made a big impression on some of the passengers. How did you like the trip?
Oh, the trip's been wonderful, wonderful.
I'll tell you, the highlight has been going over the Letchworth Gorge on that trestle. It was just the most amazing view ever. I would do this again in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
The train passed over the famous Portageville Viaduct in Letchworth State Park, giving passengers a spectacular view of the Portage River, possibly the last one from a passenger train on this structure, as a new bridge is being built to replace the 1875 span used by these excursions. Some of the passengers say they will continue their train adventures.
We did an Amtrak trip across country 2 years ago, and this trip here was even more exciting because of the coal and the steam, and when you're going around the curves you can see the smoke coming out of the engine. It's just been great.
For the excursion operators, trips like this happen only after months of planning and preparation.
Our rule of thumb is it takes about 10 days of work for every day we're out on the main line. Believe it or not, the planning began last August. We developed some preliminary things that we wanted to do. We met with the Norfolk Southern Railroad about that. One thing they had on their agenda is Norfolk Southern has been running a series of employee appreciation excursions since 2012.
York described the planning for these particular trips from Buffalo to Corning and back. He said they grew out of plans to do excursions near Allentown, Pennsylvania.
One of the things left on their schedule that they wanted to run employee appreciation trips for was out of Allentown, Pennsylvania. Well, if we are going to go to Allentown, Pennsylvania, we're going to be passing through Buffalo, New York.
While steam locomotives are a rarity on the main line in the 21st century, you can still find living, breathing examples all across the country on tourist railroads, and one place to experience it is Strasburg, Pennsylvania, home to one of the first and finest operating steam railroad operations in the country. Let's take a trip there.
In Strasburg, Pennsylvania, railroad preservation was taken to a new level, as an entire operating railroad was saved from abandonment. Since then, the Strasburg Railroad has prospered and has gone on to become one of the finest operating tourist railroads and attractions in the country. The Strasburg Railroad allows travelers an opportunity to experience what it was like in the late 19th century and early 20th century, when life was much simpler. Ironically, when steam locomotives were completely replaced by diesels by 1960 on the Class I railroads, the Strasburg began operating its first steam locomotive the same year and has kept the fires burning well into the 21st century. Incorporated in 1832, the railroad faced numerous ups and downs during its first 125 years, but by late 1950s, the railroad was on hard times, suffering from years of neglect and damage caused by Hurricane Hazel. In 1958, the owners filed for abandonment. The railroad ceased operations and filed for abandonment, and the end seemed near, but one local individual had other ideas. Henry K. Long, a rail fan from nearby Lancaster, organized a non-profit group to purchase the railroad and operate it. After an uphill battle, they were ultimately successful, and the railroad was purchased for $18,000 on November 1, 1958. 10 days later, the first carload of freight was hauled to a mill in Strasburg, the only customer at the time. Rail freight business has been a vital element to every community since the first trains began operating. Many of the products that you buy at your local store are shipped by rail. Appliances, clothes, fruits, vegetables, furniture, lumber, paper, and more. And even if you've never traveled by train, your car has.
Every new car takes a ride on a train, if you can believe it. Yes, it does. It's basically the most, again, economical way to transport automobiles and trucks is by rail, and then you go to the mixing bowls, so to speak, in their respective distribution locations. It's basically called a hub and spoke, and shipping by rail is the most economical way because they can put 15 automobiles basically on one car, auto rack carrier they call them, and 15 automobiles, and they go to a stirring pot area, so to speak, such as like up in Albany to deliver the northeast area. And they come out of their origination points of Detroit and down in Louisiana and things like that.
So what has led to this resurgence of freight and passenger business? Rail freight is at higher levels than in the heyday of the business, and passenger service is at its record levels as well.
What's brought it back is deregulation. That's what it comes down to. It's now more cost effective to ship by rail than in many cases by truck, even though by truck you can get to point A to point B in a timely fashion. It's like a pipeline on rails, basically, a warehouse on rails, so to speak. So you can put things in boxcars or put things in containers and then ship it from point A to point B. And it's like a warehouse on wheels. So it's still just-in-time delivery. It just takes a little longer, and it costs a lot less and far more economical, and adds to the footprint, the green footprint that we're looking at nowadays for America. So we're hauling more freight than at any other time, even at the height of World War II, right now in the United States.
On September 25, 2014, the Steuben County Industrial Development Agency celebrated the completion of a 3-year and about $910,000 investment project. Local officials, community leaders, and rail representatives cut the ribbon, opening and reestablishing railroad service to the industrial park in Bath. The project received a grant of over $700,000 from the New York State Department of Transportation through the Southern Tier Regional Economic Development Council. The Steuben County IDA and the B&H Rail Corporation also contributed and played a large role in the rehabilitation of the line. Officials believe the Bath and Hammondsport line will be a great economic asset to the area. This was the first official train to travel on the newly renovated line.
You know, for the first time since 1996, we are able to say that we've got an active rail line to our industrial park, which is 97 acres that's ready for development in Bath. So suddenly we can go out and market to a whole different clientele of businesses who may be interested in coming here because we can provide rail service.
The rail industry was so strong locally that nearly every family had one or more members who worked on the railroad.
Well, it was my grandfather, my mother's dad. His name was Paul Zabriskie, and he lived over on Lackawanna Avenue. And he started working for the railroad, I think it was 1918, and worked with them until 1954. And I'm not positive exactly what he did, but this was back in the days when they laid the track and the ties and all that stuff by hand. So I think he was kind of roused about doing that sort of work.
My great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather worked out of Sayre for the Lehigh Valley, and on the dad's side, my great-grandfather worked out of Renova, PA, for the Pennsylvania Railroad as a blacksmith.
My dad was worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad, then the Penn Central Railroad when they merged. My uncle worked on the Erie Lackawanna that was here. This was a huge, when I was a kid, this was a huge railroad town.
Oh, it was a good career. My grandfather had it for 40 plus years. My father had it for 40 plus years on the Pennsy, and I had my 40 years. And the biggest thing that I had that I enjoyed was the experience in moving to different locations, being with different people, doing different things as a salesman or as supervisors, and the things that supervisors would have to do on occasion.
You know, I grew up, my father worked for the Erie Lackawanna for 40 plus years, so in our house we talked about trains and railroads forever, so this is the first time I've ever ridden a train, so it was really, it really brought his stories to life. It was great.
The sights and sounds of a train have fascinated people young and old for generations. The love of trains is passed on from one generation to another, from father to son, grandfather to grandson, and sometimes even father to daughter.
We were in Crescent outside Altoona, and I was telling people I knew about how since I was a kid, probably about baby or whatever, I got into trains. The thing that really got me into it was one of my dad's EL books, Erie Lackawanna. It had the maroon, yellow, and gray. I just like that paint scheme.
Many of today's younger rail fans, like Missy Gray, were born long after the heyday of train travel, but they still enjoy the experience of watching freight trains trackside and taking a scenic journey on a passenger train.
Whenever kids would go to football games, I'd go trackside and watch trains.
Sometimes the interest is passed down from one generation to the next, despite having never met.
My grandfather on my mother's side worked for the Burlington Railroad out in Kansas City, Missouri, and he did different tasks out there. He unfortunately passed away when she was not even 2 years old, so I never had a chance to get to know him. But he was very interested into the hobby of railroading and model trains, but we think that it was sort of passed down to me in some form or another to kind of continue, since he didn't live a very long life. I think it's great to see families introducing the interest in trains to their kids. I think it's a great hobby for anyone and everyone, and it leaves you with some great memories to tell.
I'm old enough to remember my father taking me over to the yards, the Pennsylvania rail yards on the south side, and I rode steam engines. It was just a different time, and this was a great rail town.
While freight trains continue to rumble through the Southern Tier daily, sadly, passenger service has been missing from the local scene, including this former Lackawanna station, for more than 40 years.
For over 100 years, the Southern Tier was home to an excellent network of passenger rail services. Trains like the Phoebe Snow, the Erie Limited, and the Lake City stopped in areas like Elmira on a daily basis. But sadly, on January 5th, 1970, that era came to an end.
It was very sad. It was cold, it was snowy, it was the middle of the night. The westbound train arrived on time at 12:35 a.m. and took off about 10 minutes later. I was with a group of people some of whom were journalists and others were just simply travelers on their way to school, on their way home from the holidays, whatever the case may be.
Tom Steen was there to witness the sad end of an era.
We got on the train and got warm and we talked about how difficult it was to be on the last train going westbound. I went to Hornell, where I then boarded the eastbound train, the number 6, Lake Cities, and it was pretty much the same kind of thing, only possibly a little more somber, because at that point it was 2 o'clock in the morning on the way back, and got here probably about 1:30, 2 o'clock, or I'm sorry, got here about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. So it was a long night, and it was a sad night, and it was, as I said, cold, snowy, and difficult. Another thing, I was always impressed and happy with the way in which I was treated by the onboard train personnel and by the people in this station. They were dedicated, they were pleasant, they were easy to deal with, and it was just sort of fun to ride the train and deal with the folks who made all of that work. And it was really sad to see it come to an end, including the folks in the ticket office who shut the window at the last, after they sold the last ticket, and put the chain up across the doorway and did everything that they had to do the very last time, knowing that it would never ever open again. Deprive the community of a transportation and commercial area. With the end of passenger service, the areas around railroad depots deteriorated, and downtowns were never quite the same as people fled to the suburbs. The now abandoned passenger depots faced a questionable future, and one of the finest examples was lost for good. In June of 1969, Elmira's beautiful Lackawanna Depot, vacant for 10 years, met its end, demolished to make room for used truck parking. Today, those trucks are gone as well. Elmira's Lackawanna Rail Trail now passes the site of the station, but many who use the trail are not aware of the location's important history. Elmira's Erie Depot survived. It wasn't always a positive story, but the future looks a bit brighter. We understand that the Hilliard Corporation is making this into a conference center for meetings and other events that could well bring this station back to life in some way to celebrate its history, which is that of significant transportation activity in Elmira. While the Lake Cities and the other trains are gone, at least for now, one significant passenger railroad memory is coming back. The old saying, "Dinner in the diner, nothing could be finer," is coming true again as the Erie-Lackawanna Dining Car Preservation Society has been restoring dining car number 469, one of 2 such cars built in 1949 for the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western's famous Phoebe Snow passenger train that passed through the Southern Tier in the 1950s and 60s. The car was later used on the Lake Cities after the merger of the Erie and the Lackawanna. Both Phoebe Snow dining cars were still on the roster right till the end of service. Both are now based in Scranton and owned by the Erie-Lackawanna Dining Car Preservation Society, an organization that was formed online. The car, number 469, made its debut in excursion train service in October 2014, traveling through the Pocono Mountains back on a portion of its original route.
The car was refurbished back to its original condition of the interior with the paint colors, the lighting, the curtains, and the shades. So if people have experienced this car when they were very young or in the past, it will feel very similar to that.
The Society plans to serve meals aboard the car, and it will operate over a portion of its original route between Scranton and the Delaware Water Gap. To learn more, go to eldcps.org. The trip continued west with a short stop in Hornell. Hornell plays a role in the nation's passenger train system as the home of car maker Alstom. Further east, in Elmira Heights, CAF USA was awarded a contract to build 130 new single-level passenger cars, which has helped increase the number of workers at the plant to its highest level in years.
You know, rail for the longest time was the primary way this country traveled before we became a highway country, and what stands behind us is exactly what we need to do more of, and get more people off the roads and more people taking mass transit for long distances.
Passenger rail service has faced an uphill battle for decades, but has survived in part due to the organized efforts of a large number of people who believe in a balanced transportation system in the United States.
Every form of transportation is subsidized by state, federal, and local dollars in some way, and that includes car travel. Organizations like the Empire State Passengers Association in New York State and the National Association of Railroad Passengers nationwide are working with Amtrak and government agencies to see that passenger rail gets a fair deal and more services are made available.
Having a major rail service like Amtrak servicing the Syracuse and Central New York area is very vital to our economy and tourism, mainly because we give our visitors options. When we promote to visitors from all around the world and try to tell them about Syracuse, one of the main questions they have is, how do I get there? And being centrally located between New York City and Niagara Falls, it's really important to have different modes of transportation, and especially the Amtrak service. So we have many travelers that come to Syracuse. You have families, you have Syracuse University students that go to Onondaga Community College, and also a lot of sports fans. So we service a lot of different communities and also travelers from all around the world. So it's very vital to have this service here.
Amtrak's 15 long-distance trains play a significant role in our transportation scene. The trains support thousands of jobs, many in rural areas, and play an important role in the tourism industry in many communities. Unlike air travel, most passengers on long-distance trains ride from the intermediate stops along the route and not between the major cities that serve as route endpoints. Many smaller communities are dependent on rail service. In recent years, airline and bus service to rural areas has declined, making Amtrak's long-distance trains an even more important travel mode for many rural communities.
A passenger service, you've got to have a good run, fairly good speeds, and you've got to have a place for cars to park to begin with, and a place for the cars to park to get off the train.
If you were to travel to Hong Kong, to Europe, I mean, high-speed trains are the way people travel, and they're beautiful, they're clean, and they're fast, and we really have lagged behind.
You see things, but you don't have the stress of driving, like road rage. Certain people have it. You don't have to deal with traffic. You don't have to deal with accidents. You basically just sit in the train and you look out the window and see the beauty of nature around you. You go through towns and see things you wouldn't see in a car.
And for all your writers out there, Amtrak recently started a residency program for writers. More than 16,000 applications were received. Only 24 were selected. The 24 writers selected for the first residency were a diverse representation of the writing community and hailed from across the country. They've been writing online about their experiences of writing in the unique environment of a long-distance train. Rob Piatri has traveled thousands of miles by train all over the country. He says train travel also offers an ideal setting for creative folks to work in.
I think the Amtrak Writers Residency Program is an excellent idea. I think it's a perfect environment for anybody who's a writer or a creative person to kind of find a very relaxed environment to be in, where you're not just sitting stationary looking at the same thing all the time. Your environment's always changing, but it's a very relaxed environment, and it's a very productive environment to be in as far as trying to do creative type work. I've done a majority of my recent writing work riding in the Amtrak Cafe car or on board the train somewhere en route to any place in the country, having been all over the country. And I find it's the best place to work. I find it really does allow you an excellent place to do creative work of any kind. If you just want to even read a book, or if you want to write one, or if you want to just think of ideas, there's things all around you that you see, both scenery and otherwise, I think really lends to the task of writing and to being able to do something really interesting and be creative.
Through the efforts of museums, individuals, and the railroads themselves, many significant examples of locomotives, passenger cars, and more from the heyday of rail transportation are still with us and have been well preserved, and many still operate.
The LA&L's 100-year-old passenger car, the Traveler, is believed to be the oldest car in common carrier service in the USA. Bringing up the rear on the steam excursion was the fully restored Dover Harbor. This is an office and sleeping car built in 1923. It's now owned and operated by the Washington, D.C. chapter of the National Railway Historical Society. We had a look at the car's fully functional galley.
We still have our original coal-fired stove from 1934 when the car was reconfigured, and up top we have a couple of charcoal grills, so we use those. Right now I've got a lot of storage in there, but you can see where we put the charcoal. On the stove, it's over on the side, and we do actually use this to bake sometimes, still. Usually not in the summer though. Pullman used a version of charcoal called Charquettes, so our charcoal is not too far off the mark.
The crew members in Corning were surrounded by spectators as they prepared the train for departure and the trip back to Buffalo. Spectators and passengers alike wondered if we'd see anything like this around here again. What will the future hold for railroading in our area? The increase in freight business and track improvements could lead to more industry, more freight business, and better rail service. We could see new and improved travel passenger service, possibly from Binghamton to New York. And we could see more excursion runs like this one to remind us and teach us of the fun and importance of history of the rails. I'm Tom Seen. Thank you for being with us on Twin Tiers Sunday.